Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we really try to extract the core knowledge from your reading list, give you that insight you can use right away. And today, wow, we are tackling a huge one. It's this persistent puzzle, really. Yeah, how do we lead effectively? How do we organize ourselves?
Yeah, and we're doing it by looking at this just incredibly broad mix of sources. I mean, it's kind of wild. We've got Machiavelli, Cicero,
Right.
modern SEAL strategy, the Bhagavad
All
Gita.
next to Pixar and Steve Jobs lessons. It's
It really is a melting pot. And the idea, I think, is to find those, universal truths that hold up across all these different contexts.
exactly, whether you're running an empire or a tech company or honestly just trying to manage your own life and decisions.
Yeah.
We're zoning in on those core tensions, right? Knowledge versus actually doing something. Central control versus letting people have autonomy.
Yeah.
And the big one, fear versus trust.
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal for you, the listeners, really to get a kind of map, a map of how success is built, how these effective systems and maybe even effective lives are put together.
We've tried to pull out these themes that connect, seemingly unrelated ideas
Yeah.
because fundamentally it's all about handling complexity and, well, human nature.
It is. It really is.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where should we start? Maybe with that first big tension, knowing versus doing. The gap between having the knowledge and actually executing.
That feels right because there's this historical bias, isn't there, especially in the West, towards pure knowledge, episteme, the know what.
Yeah.
Like that's the highest form of achievement.
Right, the philosopher contemplating the universe.
Exactly. But what's fascinating is how many of our sources push back on that. They suggest it's incomplete, maybe even, a bit misleading when you're talking about real-world effectiveness.
So Cicero comes in here, the Roman statesman.
Yeah, Cicero makes a really strong case. He argues that our duties from social connections, things like justice, actually caring for people, those are like more naturally aligned with us than just thinking deep thoughts.
So sitting around contemplating is nice,
But
but
it's secondary. He
Yeah.
actually called pure contemplation Sophian, wisdom for its own sake. He called it defective and imperfect if it doesn't lead somewhere.
imperfect unless it leads to action.
Action that actually benefits people, helps the community, feeds the hungry, whatever it might be. For Cicero, the best person isn't the one who knows the most abstract stuff. It's the one who applies wisdom.
So it's about the techne, the craft, the know-how.
Precisely.
Right.
Know how over know what in many ways.
And Taleb gives us a modern example of this with Switzerland.
He does. It's a great illustration. He points out that Switzerland, this incredibly successful, stable country, historically had way fewer university graduates compared to similar rich countries.
Okay, why was that?
Well, their whole system, banking, manufacturing, you name it, was built on apprenticeships, really strong apprenticeship models.
Ah, so they prioritized the technique.
They did. They valued sending a young person to learn a craft, get that hands-on contextual experience, more than sending them off for 4 years of purely, book learning.
That really highlights something, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That success isn't just about theory. It's about mastering the actual skills to get things done.
And you can't master a skill, any craft really, without, messing up sometime.
Right, which brings us straight into risk and failure. If you prioritize action, you have to be okay with things not always going perfectly.
You absolutely do. And this is where, a modern place like Pixar offers such valuable lessons. It shows this ancient tension is still completely relevant.
Especially in creative fields. Their insight is that aiming for zero failures. That's not just unrealistic, it's actually harmful.
It's worse than useless, is how they put it. It kills innovation. It makes everyone play it safe, go for the mediocre option because they're terrified of failing.
So what's the alternative?
The goal isn't no failures. It's making sure the failures you do have are small, cheap, and happen early in the process.
Okay.
Pixar deliberately structured their development phase. That's the low-cost part for maximum iteration. Let directors try things, crash and burn quickly, figure out the story without spending millions.
Because if you avoid all the small failures,
You basically guarantee a massive catastrophic one later on when the stakes are incredibly high during actual production.
and failure, handled the right way, can actually be transforming. You mentioned Steve Jobs.
Yeah, the sources quote John Lasseter talking about Jobs' journey getting kicked out of Apple, then coming back. He saw it as a classic hero's journey.
And the point wasn't just that he survived it.
No, the point was that the failure itself, that crucible experience, made him fundamentally better, wiser, and kinder. It wasn't a detour. It was essential to his growth.
And that shared experience of difficulty, it builds trust within a team.
Massively. The sources really emphasize this. Going through tough times together, like really backing each other up when things look grim, that builds a kind of foundational trust that you just don't get when everything's smooth sailing. Shared survival creates incredibly strong bonds.
But there's a dark side to that pressure cooker environment too, isn't there? That Toy Story 2 anecdote.
Ugh, yeah. That one is just, it's harrowing. The pressure on that film was apparently unbelievable. 7 days a week, super late nights, constant crunch to hit this impossible deadline.
The go culture was so intense that
That an artist, completely exhausted, chronically stressed, just forgot his infant child in the car, in the heat. It's just horrific to think about.
thankfully the child was okay.
Yes, thankfully. Another employee found the baby in time, but the sheer horror of that near tragedy, it sent shockwaves through the leadership. It was a massive wake-up call.
I mean, you have to pause on that. It's such a visceral, awful example of how pursuing success, like the external metrics, can become incredibly toxic.
Absolutely. And Toy Story 2 was a huge success, right? Critically acclaimed, made $500 million, even better than the first one in many ways.
The cost.
The cost was devastating. The exhaustion, the repetitive stress injuries across the team, and that one almost fatal incident. It forced them to admit their process was broken.
Even if people want to give that much, leadership realized it's just not acceptable.
Exactly. It showed them starkly that maximizing the external output, the box office, was literally destroying the internal system, their people.
Which links back to failure and learning, doesn't it? And maybe Carol Dweck's growth mindset idea.
It does, perfectly. If the organization or the leader punishes every mistake or demands this impossible perfection.
You get a fixed mindset. Everyone's just focused on looking competent, not actually learning or growing.
Right. But if you create space for necessary failure, treat it as a learning opportunity, that's when you foster growth, innovation, and just as importantly, psychological safety.
Psychological safety. Okay, that feels like the perfect bridge to our next big area. Organizational culture. If we want action and growth, we have to tackle fear versus trust.
Yeah, because fear is the ultimate killer of action, isn't it? And communication, too. The Pixar sources talk about how managers often want tight control.
And maybe even more importantly, they need to appear like they're always in control.
Right. That appearance of control is key. And that fear, their own fear of looking unprepared or surprised, leads to all sorts of wasted effort.
Like the pre-meeting.
Exactly. The meeting before the meeting, where everything gets filtered and sanitized so there are no surprises in the actual meeting, it's driven entirely by the manager's fear of being caught off guard.
And the result down the line.
Employees feel like they have to walk on eggshells. They hold back bad news. They don't offer real critique because they're afraid of the reaction.
It's a signal, isn't it?
Mm.
When managers are secretive, they're basically saying, I don't trust you.
Whether they mean to or not. And the antidote, the only real antidote, according to these sources, is trust.
But you can't just declare, we have trust now.
No, absolutely not. It's not a policy. It has to be built patiently, brick by brick, over time, and it's built through actions. Specifically, how leaders respond consistently and constructively when failures do happen, and through being candid.
That brings up difficult conversations. The crucial conversations work.
What was their key insight?
It's so important. They argue that people rarely get defensive about the content of a tough conversation. What makes them defensive is the intent they perceive behind it.
So it's not what I'm saying, but why they think I'm saying it.
Exactly. If they think your intent is to blame them or punish them or manipulate them, they'll shut down immediately. Doesn't matter how right your facts are.
So to make progress, you have to
Why?
step back.
Step out of the content entirely for a moment. Address the perceived intent directly. Say something like, look, my goal here is to figure this out together, not to point fingers. You have to rebuild that feeling of safety first.
Which is hard because there's always that power dynamic, that perception gap. Oh, huge. The extreme ownership guys talk about this. Senior leaders often see themselves as laid back, my door is always open.
But that's not how subordinates see it.
Almost never. To the subordinate, they're still the boss. Experienced, smart, sure, but most importantly, powerful. That title itself creates a barrier.
So the leader's job isn't just being open. It's actively working to dismantle the barrier their own authority creates.
Precisely. You have to constantly work to make it genuinely safe for people to speak up.
Okay, so trust and transparency are vital. What happens when you need to scale this beyond just one team?
That's where things get even more complex. The modern battlefield, like the one McChrystal describes, it's just too complicated for a single top-down hierarchy anymore.
So they had to shift to a team of teams.
Right, and the key insight there wasn't trying to make everyone on every team know everyone else. That's impossible at scale.
So what was the focus?
Building trust between the different teams. The SEALs needed to trust the Army Special Forces guys, who needed to trust the CIA liaisons, who needed to trust the intel analysts back home.
How did they build that inter-team trust?
Through shared purpose, first and foremost, everyone understood the overall mission. And then practically, by embedding people with other units, sharing information constantly, having dedicated liaisons, it was about creating, trust by proxy.
And within that structure, where does the leader need to be? Physically, metaphorically.
The SEALs have this principle. The leader needs to be positioned in the middle of the action, generally.
Not too far forward.
No. If you're right at the front, you get sucked into the immediate firefight, the tactical details, you lose the bigger picture, your situational awareness suffers, you become a great operator, but a lousy commander.
And not too far back either.
Definitely not. Too far back and you're disconnected, you don't know what's really happening on the ground, you lose that feel for the execution.
So middle ground lets you see enough detail, but also maintain strategic oversight.
Exactly. You need that freedom to move, observe, and influence the most critical posts of the operation without getting bogged down or losing touch.
This need to translate experience, make it scalable. It also connects to teaching, right? Leaders as teachers.
Oh, absolutely. This was a huge insight from Pixar, particularly Andrew Stanton. He realized that their proven, experienced directors had a responsibility, like a core part of their job, to teach the next generation.
Why was that so critical for them?
They were worried about avoiding the kind of slump Disney went through after Walt died. All that accumulated genius, that institutional knowledge, it just kind of evaporated because it hadn't been deliberately passed on.
So Pixar wanted to institutionalize the wisdom?
Yes. Formal mentoring, modeling behavior, teaching the newer directors how to think smart when we're not around, as Stan put it. It's about building a sustainable creative culture, not just relying on a few geniuses.
That's a big shift from guarding expertise to actively sharing it.
It really is. And it loops back to candor again. If your default as a manager is openness, not secrecy, you signal trust. You empower people with information, and they tend to take more ownership and make better decisions.
Okay, shifting gears now from team dynamics to the really big picture. Section 4, structures of governance. Scale, stability, political power.
Right, and Taleb's ideas about randomness give us a really useful lens here. He talks about mediocristan versus extremistan.
Can you break those down quickly?
Sure. Highly centralized systems, like big nation states, tend towards extremistan. They seem super stable for long periods.
Until they're not.
Exactly. Then you get sudden, massive shocks, a huge financial crisis, a revolution, something with enormous consequences. The variation happens in big, rare lumps.
And mediocristan.
That comes from more decentralized, bottom-up systems. You get lots of small changes, local ups and downs, a business failing here, a minor scandal there.
But these small things tend to cancel each other out.
Largely, yes. They don't cascade through the whole system. So, ironically, all that small-scale volatility leads to greater overall stability at the macro level. The system is more robust because no single failure can bring it all down.
And this isn't just a modern idea. You mentioned historical empires.
Right. Think about the Romans or the Ottomans. They governed huge areas, but they relied heavily on semi-independent regions, local governors with a lot of autonomy.
And that wasn't just because they loved freedom.
Probably not primarily, no. It was practical. It provided more stability than trying to micromanage everything from the center, especially before instant communication.
The central government just couldn't control everything.
Logistically impossible. The sources mention the central state might have only accounted for 5% of the local economy or daily life. So local rulers had to be largely sovereign on many issues. It was decentralized by necessity, which probably made the empires more resilient overall.
Okay, so that's the practical decentralization. But then you have the theory of state power, like with Hobbes.
Yeah, Hobbes gives us that foundational, maybe stark argument for why we need a state in the first place. He defines justice very simply.
As keeping promises,
And then it's keeping covenants, yes. He says those promises are meaningless. Injustice doesn't even exist as a concept until you remove the fear that the other person won't keep their promise.
How do you remove that fear?
With a coercive power, as he calls it, a central authority, the state, that's strong enough to make everyone afraid of the consequences of breaking their promises.
So fear of punishment is the bedrock.
For Hobbes, yes. Without that coercive power enforcing agreements, you can't even have private property propriety. Because in the state of nature, everyone has a right to everything. The state creates ownership by enforcing boundaries through the threat of force.
Wow, that's a pretty grim view. How does Rousseau compare? He saw the family as a model.
He did initially. He suggested the family is the prime model for political society, which sounds warmer, more based on natural affection. But he immediately qualifies it. He points out a crucial difference. A father looks after his children and is repaid with love. A ruler looks after the people.
And gets repaid with?
Not necessarily love. The ruler might not feel love for the people at all. What the ruler gets, Rousseau says, is the pleasure of being in charge.
Ah. So affection gets replaced by the satisfaction of power.
That's the core distinction he makes, which leads us right into the real-world messiness of actually forming a state, which the Federalist Papers tackle head-on.
Right, they were arguing for the U.S. Constitution against some serious opposition. What were the main obstacles they identified?
They pinpointed two big ones, both rooted in self-interest. First, there were the people already holding power in the individual states, governors, local officials, tax collectors.
The state-level establishment.
Exactly. They had positions, salaries, emoluments. They knew a strong federal government would reduce their own power and influence. So naturally, they resisted. It was about protecting their jobs and status.
Makes sense. And the second obstacle?
Pure ambition. There were individuals who saw confusion and division as an opportunity. They figured they had a better chance of rising to power if the country broke apart into smaller pieces, or if there was general chaos they could exploit.
So, personal gain through national instability.
Pretty much. They wanted to aggrandize themselves through the country's troubles.
So whether it's ancient empires or the founding of the U.S., these external structures, governments, organizations, they're always battling internal human drives like self-interest and ambition.
Constantly. Which means, ultimately, effective leadership of any system has to grapple with the leader's own internal landscape, the inner life.
Okay, Section 5. This feels like where it gets really deep. Leading oneself. And we're looking at the Bhagavad Gita here.
Yes. And it defines failure very differently, right? Not in terms of money or power, but in terms of inner attachment and getting your identity wrong.
He talks about kapatas, miserly persons.
Right. And these aren't misers in the sense of hoarding money necessarily. They're miserly because they're wasting their human potential by being overly attached to temporary material things.
Like family, society, country.
Exactly. Things the Gita almost dismissively calls a skin disease, something external, superficial that we mistakenly identify with.
What's the core delusion there?
The delusion is believing that these external things, your family, your wealth, your social standing, can actually save you from the fundamental realities of suffering and death.
And this was Arjuna's problem at the start of the battle.
Precisely. His confusion, his inability to do his duty as a warrior, it all stemmed from his deep affection for his family members who were on the opposing side. He was caught by those very material attachments the Gita warns against.
So the path to freedom, or maybe effective action, involves seeing things differently.
Radically differently. It requires understanding that your true nature, the living entity or consciousness, is separate from the material body. The text calls the body the city of 9 gates.
Okay, what does that mean? The 9 gates.
It's a pretty straightforward metaphor for the physical openings of the body. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, the mouth, and the organs of excretion and generation. 9 gates.
So the idea is you, the real you, are just residing in this body.
Yes, you're the resident, not the city itself. And suffering comes from mistakenly thinking you are the city, this perishable physical structure.
Wow. Okay, so self-mastery is foundational. Emerson had thoughts on this too, about spontaneity.
Yeah, Emerson had this belief that real strength, real effectiveness doesn't come from straining and effortful willing. It comes from easy, simple, spontaneous action.
How do you achieve that?
By obedience, by aligning yourself with and obeying a higher universal law or principle. When you do that, he thought, you find perfect contentment, and the need for all that stressful, ego-driven striving just falls away. You tap into a deeper current.
Sounds nice, but maybe not easy in practice. Covey talks about the difficulty of growth.
Right. Covey points out how much harder it is to develop character and emotional maturity compared to, say, learning tennis. With tennis, you know if you're getting better. With character, it's much fuzzier.
And what's the key to that kind of inner growth for Covey?
Admitting ignorance. That's the absolute first step in any real education or growth, having the humility to say, I don't know, or I messed up.
And taking responsibility for your own state.
Yes. Taking responsibility for your own emotional level rather than, as he puts it, operating from low emotional level yourself while trying to dish out high-level advice to everyone else. You have to walk the talk internally.
Okay, but leadership isn't always about inner peace and high ideals, right? Sometimes it's about hard choices. Machiavelli.
Ah, Machiavelli, yes. He brings us crashing back to the harsh realities of power. He basically advises the prince that he must be smart enough to know how to do wrong when necessary.
Reading.
Meaning, for the sake of preserving the state, which is the prince's ultimate job, sometimes you have to act in ways that look like vice.
So being purely virtuous could lead to ruin.
That's his argument. Sometimes being excessively generous or always keeping your word no matter what could actually destroy your power and destabilize the state. Whereas calculated cruelty or deception used judiciously might bring security and order.
That's a tough pill to swallow. The ends justify the means, essentially.
For the prince, focused solely on maintaining power, Machiavelli implies yes. The highest virtue is the survival and strength of the state itself, even if personal morality has to be bent or broken.
How does that contrast with someone like Maslow, his hierarchy of needs?
Well, Maslow offers a more optimistic path for the individual's development. He suggests that as healthy people satisfy their basic needs, safety, food, belonging, they don't just stop wanting things.
The desires change.
Yes, they substitute higher desires. They become oriented towards self-improvement, wisdom, self-actualization. We're always striving, but the object of our striving elevates as we mature psychologically.
So we have this incredible tension at the end. Machiavelli, sacrifice inner virtue for the external state. Bhagavad Gita, sacrifice external attachments for inner duty.
Exactly. It brings it all together, whether it's the necessary vice of the prince, or the necessary failure of the artist, or the necessary detachment of the warrior. Effective leadership seems to require this intense self-awareness, accepting imperfection, and having the guts to act based on principle, not just comfort or popularity.
So let's try to wrap this up. We've journeyed through ancient philosophy, military strategy, modern business, spiritual texts. What's the common thread?
I think it's this dual mastery, isn't it? You need mastery of the external systems, building trust, making sure action happens, not getting stuck in theory.
Right.
But you also need this radical internal mastery, understanding your real duties, being okay with failure, navigating these really tough moral gray areas. You can't have one without the other, it seems.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting then. We've seen this pattern across the sources, this tension between doing what's needed for the system right now, hit the deadline, keep this state secure, maximize profit, and these suggestions of higher principles we maybe should follow, even if they conflict with that immediate success.
Yeah, like the Pixar manager pushing people past the breaking point for the deadline.
Or the prince choosing statecraft over conventional morality.
Or the computers in the Gita, clinging to family and society, those immediate attachments, instead of pursuing their higher spiritual duty. They're seen as intellectually miserly for doing that.
So these sources, old and new, they keep questioning the ultimate value of those immediate material goals when they clash with something deeper. So the question for you, the listener.
Right. What does this all mean for you? And maybe consider this. Hobbes said justice really only starts when there's a coercive power, some external force strong enough to make people keep their promises because they fear the consequences.
Okay.
So in your own life, what's your coercive power? What system, what principle, what commitment have you set up that enforces your highest values and long-term goals? When that immediate comfort or convenience, or maybe that emotional attachment, your own inner kapati tendency tries to pull you off course, what makes you stick to your path? Is it just willpower in the moment, or have you built a structure, an internal state that compels you towards your own stated duties?
That's a deep one to reflect on. What enforces your highest commitments?
Definitely something to chew on.
Indeed. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Lots to think about there.